Hey, good evening and welcome to our Wednesday night win. This is Pastor Larry Rodriguez from Desert Rain Church once again, and we just want to welcome you to our Wednesday night win, a testimony by one of our most precious sisters here at Desert Rain Church, Sister Brandy Gamboa. She's going to share with you some things, some experiences in her life, what led her to come to a place where she surrendered to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm sure for those of you that are watching out there, there's going to be some familiarity with the story that she tells and your life. So just sit back, relax, and listen, and allow the Lord to minister to you, to speak to your heart through this testimony. God bless.
Hi, my name is Brandy. I want to share my testimony today with you because I hope that it blesses you. But more importantly, I just want to glorify God for everything that He's done in my life. So I did not grow up in church. I had like a very typical childhood, but it was not church-centered and it was not Christ-focused at all. But I had a praying grandma, and my grandma was like my idol. I just thought she was amazing because she was. She raised 10 kids by herself, and she was just that place of comfort for me. And I remember that even though we didn't go to church and even though I didn't know God, every night before she would go to sleep, she would sit at the edge of her bed and she would start reading her Bible. And I would ask her, Grandma, how many times have you read that thing? And she would say, I lost count. Or she'd give me some answer like that. But she taught me how to pray. She taught me the Lord's Prayer, and she taught me how to bless my food. And those things, they just kind of stayed with me. As I got a little bit older, she began to get really sick, and so she had Alzheimer's. So a lot of my teenagers were spent in hospitals because she kept, having strokes. And during that time, our house was kind of a revolving door where people would come in and watch us because my parents were with her. And during this time, I experienced sexual assault by someone very close to our family. And as a child, basically, I didn't know what to do with that. But the worst part was how my parents reacted, because unfortunately, they were overwhelmed and I got the blame. So I lived my existence as a teenager thinking that I was doing these things that, caused people to do bad things to me. So because my parents didn't believe me, I didn't tell them because I didn't want to tell them, and I was scared to tell them. But they found out because I told someone else. And I remember that they looked over at me and they called me names. And it was just like this. Up until that point, my dad was my hero. I wanted to go everywhere he went. My mom was amazing. She was my best friend and my confidant. And in a moment, it was gone. In a moment, they were strangers and they hated me. At least that's how I felt as a kid. And there was anger. There was so much anger that it didn't matter what they did to me after that, because it didn't matter what rule they gave me. It didn't matter what they tried to do to me, because I always had this anger that I could just fling back at them and they would shut down because they didn't know how to deal with it either. And this went on for years until I was an adult. And after I left my house, my parents started going to church, which further pushed me from Jesus, because if they're going to church, I'm not going to church. That's the kind of people that go to church? Absolutely not. That's how I felt. But they started going to church, and I did see God work in my dad's life, and I did see God work in my mom's life, as in they would try to communicate with me and they would try to reach out to me, and my dad would try to apologize to me, and I would just shut it down. I didn't want anything to do with it. And it wasn't until later, after I had my own encounter with God, that I still didn't know how to approach it, because I wanted to forgive them, but I didn't know how to bring it up. And so it was a little bit tricky. And one day we just had a conversation, and it was awkward, and there were tears, but God was in the middle of it. And I say that because even though everything that was said was true, there was no anger behind our words. There was a lot of compassion and a lot of understanding. And now I mean, like, when you drop the anger, when we drop the anger, I cannot tell you, like, the relationship that we have is amazing. Like, my dad is more than my best friend. Like, he's my hero, because now I can understand from his perspective what was happening. And I can see it from a lens of, like, love, compassion. My mom, she's, like, goals. Like, and I never thought I would say that about my parents, but that's how Jesus transforms lives, and that's how you're able to let go of anger, because it's blinding. So now they're like amazing. We're amazing. We're actually doing really, really good, and they're such a blessing to me, to my family. I couldn't ask for better parents, but I never thought I would have said that before any of us knew God. So my grandma got really sick during this time, so we couldn't even talk about it. I had no outlet for this anger and this hurt. We couldn't talk about it because you don't want to kill your grandma. So she was in the hospital and she had a really bad stroke, and the doctor said she might not make it. I remember going in the closet, and I didn't believe in God, but I remember going in the closet and saying, God, if you save her, I will do whatever you want. You know, it's just this kid reaching out to God. And unfortunately, my grandma passed away. And because I didn't have anywhere to take those feelings of anger and frustration and disappointment, I just pointed it at God. And I didn't want anything to do with God. God was not real, because if he was real, he would have saved her and he would have stepped in. And there was just a lot of anger at myself, at my parents. So I decided, I remember the day I decided I am in this alone and there is no one that's gonna take care of me. And I just became fiercely independent. And because if you don't depend on anyone, then you can never get hurt. If you're never vulnerable, if you never let anyone in, then they can never let you down. So as soon as I was able to, 17, I left my house, I joined the military, I started drinking and partying and just living life as best as I thought, because I had no guidance, so I had to look out for myself. And after a couple of years of doing that, I was pregnant, and I thought, well, that's the end of that. Like, that's the end of my life is over. And it turned out to be that little girl was the biggest blessing ever. Like, the love that she gave me was so free. It was so unguarded. It was pure. And the saddest thing is that I couldn't return it. Like, I couldn't love her the way she needed and deserved to be loved, because I couldn't get to that place. That place inside of me was broken. And so I messed up a lot. And I decided to leave the military because it just fueled my anger, and it wasn't doing anything good for me or for her. And I just tried my best. I did counseling, I sought peace, I Googled spirituality, because anything except God, like anything that would bring me peace except God. And then she started asking about God and angels, and are they real? And I just didn't have the heart to tell her that they weren't. So I just kind of talked about them like we talk about the Easter Bunny. A couple years after that, she was probably 5, she got really sick, like really sick. She had a fever of like 102, 103 for 4 days. Her skin was peeling, she was getting patches, she had spots on her tongue. So I took her to the hospital, and the doctor said, look, I don't want to scare you, but all these symptoms, they line up to this disease, and it has no cure. I don't want you to look it up, but I just want you to be prepared for when the test results come back. So of course I looked it up, and I was devastated. Like, the survival rate was less than 5% for kids, and I was just, here was the most beautiful, most important little person ever in my entire life, and I didn't know where to go. And I remember sitting at her bed and not knowing if God was real, and saying, if you save her, I will do whatever you want. I promise. I will go to your church. I will learn about your Jesus. Just save her. Just save her. I just wrote this blank check to God, never thinking that he'd answer it. So here I am. I'm praying the same desperate prayer again to a God that doesn't have this like really good track record with me, right? So why would I do that? And it's because even though God didn't answer that prayer, throughout my entire life, I would meet people who would talk about God, and who would talk about God in a different way than anybody else. Or they would say things like, I'll pray for you. Or they would live in their life in a way that I'm like, oh, okay, this person is different. And so even though I didn't want to believe in God, there were all these little seeds that were planted along the way. Like all these little quick, you wouldn't think that they would make like any difference that one time, but then when you put them all together, and now I'm in this desperate situation, it's almost like I couldn't deny that that's the place I had to go to. Like he's the one I had to pray to. I couldn't pray to like Buddha, and I couldn't pray to Allah, and I couldn't like just zen myself into it. It was like I knew that if I had to pray, it had to be to God, and that his son Jesus, even if I didn't know Jesus, like I had to. Like there was so much desperation that maybe he would hear me. 2 days later, she was discharged because the blood work came back and they don't know what it was. So it was like a miracle, and I knew it was a miracle. I knew it. I mean, I felt it because this was so different. And so after, once we found out that, she was like miraculously healed, it was actually her doctor. He said something, which was interesting because I wanted answers. I wanted to know. I saw the symptoms. They're in her medical record. Like I know that she was not okay. And I wanted to know what happened. And when I went after the hospital, I followed up with her doctor, and he said, in the medical term, we call these things instantaneous healings. Like the body just kind of made itself better. But as a Christian man, he said, what you have in front of you is a breathing miracle. And it just like, I get chills, like still thinking about it today, because that's how I knew. Like I talked to God and he answered me. And now looking back, I get why he didn't answer my prayer for my grandma. She was in so much pain that even if her life would have been saved, and I knew this, right? Her quality of life, she wouldn't have been the same. She had 3 strokes already and a mild heart attack. And mentally, she had Alzheimer's. Like mentally, she wasn't there. And I know now that that was God extending mercy, even though as a child, because I didn't have the context to understand it, I just looked at it as, okay, that's another person. Like God is just another person abandoning me. But going through this experience with my daughter, what I saw was this God that cared. Like he listened to me, even though I ignored him, even though I didn't want anything to do with him. I mocked him, all of it. I mocked Christianity. I mocked all of it. And he still, when I needed him, was there. That was like the difference maker for me. And that's why I kept my promise to find out who he was, because of him, not because of me. And I kept good on it. She pointed out this church. She pointed out Desert Rain, and she said, oh, I want to go there. I came. And I sat all the way in the back. Like there's pillars and they hide you. And I sat all the way in the back. And I just kind of, I had made this promise, and I just wanted to just be like, okay, I went. I checked the box, And one day during service, there was a pastor, and he was giving the word. And man, he was talking right to me. Like he was talking about brokenness. He was talking about trust. He was talking about being let down by people and hurt by the world. And he was talking to me. And I remember that at the end of it, he did an altar call. And maybe 1 or 2 people came up. And I was like, okay. Whew. No, he wasn't talking to me. And he said, I'm going to stay here a little bit longer. And then like 1 more person came up. And by now I feel like these pins on my seat. Like I know it's me. I know he's waiting for me. And I was like, what's up, guy? Like, didn't you get your quota already? Like, I'm done here. And then he said, I'm just going to wait a little bit longer because I think you have to come up. And it was like this fire was in my, like I jumped up and I just made a beeline for the altar. I wasn't even looking. I was just like, because if these people look at me, they're gonna judge me and they're gonna know how bad I am. I don't know what I was thinking. But I just reached out, and there were hands that reached out back to me, someone from the prayer team. And I don't know this lady. She doesn't know me. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw my grandma. I saw like this look like, I've been waiting for you. And I just broke in that moment. I broke. I just left it all right there, as much of it as I could. And I want to tell you that my life changed, right? That everything was perfect after that, and whew, like rainbows and butterflies, but it wasn't, and it was really hard. But God pursued me every step of the way. And if you would have told me that years later I would have been sitting here talking about how good God is and how much He's changed me, I always say my life was like a snow globe and He shook it. But when all the pieces settled, they settled where they were supposed to. But I had this toxic relationship, one of many, because of the decisions that I had made. And so I had to decide, this person that I had been with for years that I loved, didn't want anything to do with this new life. And that was heartbreaking. And I was trying to hold on to that. And I was trying to hold on to Jesus. And my friends were pulling this way, and I was pulling this way. And I really got to a point where I was like, I can't, can I let all of this go? I'm letting go of so much. Like, is it worth it? I just got to this point. And then I was driving home. And at this time, I felt like every time I prayed, God answered it. Like I would pray and then boom, there was my answer. Boom. Like my faith was really growing because I was seeing God move all over in little places. And I was driving home and I said, God, if I'm not strong enough to leave these friendships and I'm not strong enough to leave these relationships, but if you want me, you'll make it so that I never want them again. And God made it so that I never wanted them again. And just, there was betrayal and there was ugliness there because I had to choose something different. But I lost my job, I lost my car, I lost my relationship, I lost my best friend of my entire life. And you would think like, wow, why would she keep following God? But when I didn't have all of that, I could only lean on my new Christian friends. I didn't have the distraction of partying, so I could only go to church and be fed spiritually. I could only reach out to my parents and restore that relationship. So even though all these things, the doors were closed, all these amazing things were happening. And I didn't realize it at the time. It felt like a lot of loss, but really what it was God just kind of shifting the things and burning off the things that didn't belong and putting the things that were important in front of me. And when I look at all the little miracles that had to happen for me to get to a place of like, okay, this is for me, this is where I want to be, because it wasn't easy, it wasn't overnight. And when I look back, then I realized that was God pursuing me. That's what that looks like. It doesn't look like God comes in and magic genie changes everything. It looks like God holds your hand and walks you through one difficult situation, and then you make it and you're like, okay, all right, you're still here. And then he walks you through another one and another one, and then he's like, okay, you can, and he'll just walk beside you and you just kind of go forward like that. And that's kind of what it's been like for me. And whenever I get too scared, I'm like, hey, you're still here, right? And he's right there. And it sounds like a little kid, but I think that God knew that that's what I needed. I needed to go back and start over and establish trust and to know that I could count and depend on him. And that's what made the difference. That's what made me stay, because I saw a God that loved me enough to walk this out with me every step of the way. Every time I freaked out, every time I cried, every time I said, it's not fair, why are you doing this to me? And every time he came through, and every time he revealed a different part of himself. And how do you not love a God like that? So I want to tell you that it was easy, but it wasn't, because
as God started to mold me and change me, I had to go back and look at that hurt and look at the disappointment and look at the pain. And if you would have told me that, I would have been sitting here not only forgiven the people that I felt had wronged me, but also felt compassion for them and love and understanding that they too were broken and that they didn't want to hurt me. Only God can do that. Only God can do that. Because if you understand the level of rage that blinds you, then you understand how important forgiveness is. So today, man, life is still messy. I still love God. He's put me in this position where I can minister to other people, women. I find that I come in contact with a lot of women all the time, and I relate to their stories, and I tell them my story, and it's not pretty, but I think people need to hear that. People need to know that, like for me, for example, when I come to church and I'm cleaned up and I'm dressed up and my hair's combed nice, you need to know that I'm not perfect, that I yelled at my kid on the way to church, in the morning, but that God still blesses me. My relationships are so good. They're healthy, not perfect, but good. There's communication, there's love. So God has opened even awesome doors in ministry, and I'm privileged to lead the young adults, the life group, the college and career group here at church. And that's a blessing all by itself, because that's just a group of individuals who just love God. And I get to be a part of that. I get to lead it. I get to hear their stories, and they minister to me and I minister to them. And it's Christianity in action. So that's awesome. That's actually like one of the most exciting things that's happening in my life right now. But I'm gonna trust him, that he's gonna do what he said he was gonna do, and that's take care of me. So I just wanna encourage you that I hope that all these ugly and messy pieces of my testimony would let you know that there's nowhere you can run. I mean, you can fill your life with things and people and relationships, but when it's done and it's empty and you're back in that same dark hole by yourself, or when you feel like I can only depend on me because everyone else is gonna let me down, I just wanna tell you that God is so good that he'll keep pursuing you and he'll keep chasing you until you're able to just find that place where you say, okay, God, if you're real, take it. And he will, I promise you, he will not disappoint you. The word of God says that he makes us a promise that he will never leave us, he will never forsake us. And that's what I stand on. So if that's what you're going through, I just want to encourage you today. Like, he's there and he's real and he's a life changer. So God bless you guys. Thank you for listening to my testimony. I'll be praying for you. God bless.
Wow, what a powerful story. Isn't God awesome? One of the things that we learn through Brandy's testimony and others that we talk to is how faithful God is. That he never lets us down. That even in our darkest hour, he's there and he makes himself known. And sometimes it's not according to our plan or our timing, but his. But we all know that God's timing is perfect. I hope that you enjoyed that testimony and that it spoke to your heart, that it ministered to you. If there's anybody out there that's maybe searching for God, you're wondering whether God is real, whether he's out there, whether he knows your life situation, circumstances, I just want to tell you, I want to reassure you that he's there, he's real, and he knows. And all he's waiting for is for you to open up your heart and call upon him and even challenge him. Lord God, if you're there, I need you in my life right now, show me. And he will. He will answer that prayer. And so I want to encourage you. If there's anything that you need, you need to talk to somebody, anything else, you can contact us at desertrain.org. That's our website, or info@desertrain.org. Okay, and it was great to have you join with us tonight. And until next week, God bless you. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderful week.